I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to our second speaker of this evening, starting with this slide. I don't know if anyone's seen Weird Science or knows what Weird Science is. Yeah? Good. There's at least 2 people in this room that have seen it, which is good. It is an amazing film, and you might be asking why it's up here. I can tell you a couple of reasons. A, I do love 80s movies, and this one in particular is one of my favourites, has to be said, especially Chet. This is Chet. Hang on. I can do a laser. That's Chet. Over in there. The second bit of the talk obviously is on behavioural science, and it's got the word science in it. Again, check. But a little bit deeper than that is this word here. Oh, I like this laser. Is the word, even outside found it funny, which is always a bonus, is weird. Now, weird in the world of behavioural science is very topical, in particular because there was, back in the noughties, there was a group of researchers at the University of British Columbia that discovered that our interpretation or that our understanding of behavioural science was very much based on a kind of skewed set of data which was heavily reliant on American students like this, who wore bras on their heads. But very much so that at least 80% of those surveyed sort of sat within this kind of Western culture, and it wasn't very representative, it was very biased. Obviously it only represented roughly 12% of the general population, so they realised there was an error there that they needed to rectify. Just going back to that page. Again, this is a scene from the film in case you were wondering, and if this wasn't enough of an advertisement for you to see it, I don't know what will be. Funnily enough, at university I actually did, I had to study philosophy as part of my degree, and I did actually do an experiment or kind of a research project around designing bras for men. So this actually is quite topical for me, but not so much topical for this evening, obviously. But behavioural science is, and one of the questions that I will have later for Alec is centred around that weird topic. But without further ado, I will move on from that, just in case it burned into your brain too much. And I'd like you to give a very warm welcome to our second speaker this evening, Alec Barr.
Thank you. You said you had to study philosophy like it was a chore. It's great. I love philosophy. Cool. Thank you everyone for being here, and thanks John and Dominic for inviting me. That's not This is what I was supposed to do. Right. Okay. So I'm here to talk about navigating the messy middle. I work at Askable, the sponsor for the event. And I'm not a behavioural scientist, I'm a behavioural science ethicist, so like back in 2012 Google dissolves their ethics board. There's sort of social dilemma, that guy, name escapes me right now, but he's brilliant, Tristan Harris. That's the kind of stuff I'm interested in, how we can use behavioural science ethically to shift user perceptions and things like that. So that's a bit of what I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to kind of hone my focus in on what I call the messy middle, or what has been deemed the messy middle, a behavioural science approach to e-commerce. So, this is me. My background is slightly in behavioural psychology and philosophy. I've mostly worked at agencies in UX and service design roles, but currently I'm heading up the agency growth department for Askable, so trying to work out how the agencies use research, are they doing it ethically, if they don't know how can we support them, and at the same time trying to sort of like foster those relationships. So, but this is like a passion area of mine. So what I'm going to do, Avi talked about listening to things on 2x speed. I will try and keep the energy in the room. I'll give a 2x podcast version of this talk. So 25 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about just e-commerce in general, or what's been deemed the infinite high street of online purchasing. Most people in this room will have actually bought something today on their phone, I can almost guarantee it. So we know that like, it's a big, expansive world. Then I'm going to start talking about behavioural science and whether or not it is the right tool or approach to helping sort of nudge behaviour within the sort of conversion funnel or purchase journeys. If it is right, how does it work? What are some good examples of it? Some of which will be really familiar to the researchers or the UXers in the room, others hopefully not. And then lastly, we'll talk about how we can use behavioral science to try and solve bigger design problems and where it sometimes doesn't work, where you need larger kind of qualitative research. So, number one, the infinite high street. And we'll begin at the beginning. We'll call this the internet. And it's been roughly assumed, using some very, very basic maths, that the weight of the internet is about 50 grams, that is the total mass of all the electrons spinning around for the internet weighs about the size of a medium egg. And I love this metaphor, so I thought I'd extend it and say that if we take some of that egg and imagine maybe, let's say, the yolk as the whole of the internet, the yolk represents e-commerce. That is, a vast, vast majority of what we're contending with online now is guiding you towards some sort of transaction, even if that transaction is just exchanging your data. Some stats. So these are US dollars. Basically, COVID accelerated the whole thing, as we know. We're now at a point where NASDAQ says that next year, 95% of all purchases will be online, which is kind of wild. The entire industry is valued exceptionally high, and it's one of the fastest growing marketplaces in the world. None of this should be a surprise because we all use this every day. Wreck-It Ralph personifies it really well. If you've ever seen Wreck-It Ralph 2, basically it gets inside the router and flies through the internet, and it kind of typifies this infinite high street idea really nicely. You've got all these different, obviously adverts glaring at you, but there's so many different avenues you can be pulled down towards and so many different channels that you can be dragged into that it gets very, very confusing. This is where the term the messy middle comes up. And the kind of critical thing to know about how the customer journey, purchase journey has become so confusing is that it's not confusing to you, the user. The fact that you're on your phone one day and your mate sends you a WhatsApp to say, buy this thing, and you read this review site, and then you go on your desktop and look at it, that is completely, you don't even think of that as a connected journey. But from a designer's point of view, looking from the outside in, that is chaotic. And how on earth do you kind of like stitch that together in a meaningful way? So Google defined this term, the messy middle. So they called it the space of abundant information and unlimited choice that shoppers have learned to manage using a range of cognitive shortcuts. And that phrase, excuse me, cognitive shortcuts is one we'll kind of come back to. So that's the kind of premise, the stuff that should all be kind of familiar. The next question is, where is science's application in this world? I'm going to use BS to mean behavioral science throughout all of this. You can take it whichever way you like. So science, some evidence. Back in 2020, Google, pre-2020, Google was doing this massive longitudinal survey, which was incredible. They took about 250,000 unique participants and they analyzed all their purchase journeys across 300 plus different routes to conversion. They picked every single product and service that you could imagine, every kind of industry vertical, and they did this massive kind of expose on customer journeys and what they look like. The fascinating thing about this for me is that one of their conclusions, probably their ultimate conclusion, was this: there are no typical journeys, just a confused set of touch points that we liken to spaghetti. So remember, this is Google. They are processing the equivalent of 100 million filing cabinets worth of raw data a day. And they do a study for 2 years and they basically say, we don't know. And it's humbling in one respect, but it's sort of frightening because how on earth, this is the space that as designers, as marketers, as product owners, whatever we do, this is the space we operate in, so how do you contend with this? This to me sums up the kind of great paradox of design, which is that as our ability to measure stuff has gone up, our ability to comprehend what we're looking at has gone down. So, for example, we have, 5 years ago, big data was the watchword, but the tools that we have to analyze that stuff, the tools that we have to pinpoint with unbelievable precision all these different unique elements in a customer journey are phenomenal. And we have incredible data scientists that I work with that can pass all that information, or we just hand it over to AI now. But our ability as humans to comprehend what we're looking at, I don't think has gotten any clearer. I don't think more complexity or more variables has meant more understanding. This is actually, this is some of the touch points that one might go through when buying something. So you might go to a search engine, review sites, interest groups, retailer websites, publishers, blah, blah, blah. One actual person in the Google study, she was buying shampoo and she went through 80 touch points to buy shampoo. And that wasn't even she didn't even think that was abnormal because you don't sit there and think critically about the number of touch points that you go through, you just kind of do it. So we've got this chaotic library of interactions that we're dealing with, and we can see all of them, provided they're all tagged well. But the question for me becomes, in amongst all this complexity, how are we going to diagnose this or use this meaningfully to do something? And I guess the controversial opinion is that I don't actually think you need to diagnose it, what's going on, to do anything about it. You can just treat it without an understanding. So this is supposed to represent broad spectrum antibiotics. A doctor does not need to know exactly what ails the patient to be able to know that penicillin is going to probably knock it out. It is a broad spectrum treatment. And I think we can apply the same sort of logic to UX design decisions. This is where behavioural science comes in, by the way. I was talking to the guys about this image. I have gotten so much mileage out of this image over the years. It is fantastic. I will have to find a new one at some point, and I'm sure Midjourney will be able to source me a better one. But this is where behavioural science comes in and says, okay, well, we'll leverage the canon of empirical data that we've had for years. We'll leverage what actual, I'm not a scientist, we'll leverage what actual scientists have found out in actual scenarios, and we'll just apply it kind of wholesale to a problem. I just wanted to pause and explain some terms just in case they get confusing. So behavioural science is the sum total of the kind of codified study of all our cognitive processes and interactions with the world. Behavioural economics is then how we take all of that stuff and learn how it informs our decision making, how we decide between choice A and choice B. And then you've got this, which you also might have heard of, nudge theory, which is the intentional use of behavioural economics to nudge people towards a desired outcome. So can be manipulative. If you're a UXer and you've heard of dark patterns, that is what this is doing, using that philosophy for evil. But these are the terms that I'm going to kind of play with. And it's all, the kind of inner workings of behavioural science is predicated on this idea, not my phrasing, but I do love it. The perception is leaky. What you see and feel is subject to context in ways that you don't necessarily realize at the time. So the quickest way to understand this is like optical illusions, right? I'm sure people have seen this because this is very tired, but square A and square B are the same color, but they don't look the same color. Square B looks lighter because it's cast in the shadow of this cylinder. I think the next slide shows, yeah, there you go. So it shows it being built. They are the same color. It's just when you surround it with context, the square B looks lighter because we think that it's in shadow. Another cool one, this one's less racing. I'm going to tell you that both of these panels are the same color as well, which hopefully, yeah, exactly, right? That's the reaction I wanted. So they really are. It's kind of wild. So this is what's happening at an optical level, and we love this, and this is kind of fun. But it's happening to you on a cognitive level anyway. So marketing examples are like the go-to. Are you going to buy yogurt that says it's 60% fat-free or 40% full of fat? It's the same thing, but you're obviously not going to buy 40% full of fat as a framing effect. You're not going to buy when we promote the bad thing, even though it is equal and opposite to the good thing. So we know that happens. We also know that you can prime people to think of certain things. So you can get people to read the 10 Commandments, and then you can get them to take a test in which they're incentivized to cheat, and they cheat less when they've read the 10 Commandments before taking the test. Happens to atheists as well. Doesn't matter if you believe in God, you can be primed into being more honest. There's also this one, opting in and opting out, the power of defaults. So Germany and Austria are two countries that have radically different opt-in rates for organ donation. Most people, you ask anyone in those countries, do they think organ donation is a good thing? Almost everyone says yes. You ask them, are they an organ donor? All the hands kind of go down. And this is because in one country you default opted in, and in the other you default opted out. So despite the attitude being the same, organ donation is a good thing, we're extremely lazy when it comes to defaults. Which is all well and good, but most of us aren't designing policy. Most of us are talking about user interfaces, so I thought I'd give a few ones of those contexts. People rarely deviate from the default position. This is kind of the organ donation thing, but here it is in the user interface. So Dropbox is telling me that, how do I want to install this program? Well, do I want to install it the typical way, which is brackets recommended, it's also highlighted, or the advanced way? They have no idea whether it's typical for me or recommended for me, but I'm going to assume that typical and recommended is synonymous with the best. So I'm just going to follow that because advanced is too scary. So that's kind of helpful because I don't need to know the features before I get, if I'm not an advanced user, I don't need to be guided through the advanced features. That's helpful. Here's a harmful version of the same thing. When I was living in Australia, I was banking with with a bank, and they default opted me into an overdraft that had a high interest rate that I wasn't aware of, and therefore, I fell into it, and it meant that I was then charged a rate that I thought I hadn't consented to. This is mostly illegal in the UK now because of GDPR, but the point is that the power of defaults is really, really strong, whether you're talking about social policy or a simple user interface. So, how does all this work in practice? And I'm going to give two kind of examples from two giants of the industry. We'll start with, they're separated by about 10 years, these case studies. We'll start with Amazon. The UXers in the room will definitely know this story, but it is a great story nonetheless. The $300 million Amazon button. So, it's 2009. The iPhone has barely come out. What else happened in 2009? Obama was president. Avatar, the good one, was out in cinema. And Amazon were in kind of, not its infancy, but like early stages of e-commerce. So this is the flow when you went through an Amazon checkout process. You put something in your basket, you hit proceed to checkout, and they give you a form that said sign in or log in. And Amazon thought this was great. Everyone loves us. It will give us sort of expediency next time someone comes through. People won't mind a small amount of friction to benefit from a huge amount of payoff and remember details. It's 2009, remember. But they were having this problem where right here, there was a massive drop-off in conversion. So close to 80% of people were abandoning, and they wondered why. They brought in some behavioural scientists and usability study experts, and they did some studies where they were asking people to go through the checkout flow and narrate out loud what their experience was. So, and obviously as you can guess, it was all negative. This is stuff that we just know nowadays. People said things like, I'm not here to enter into a relationship, I just want to buy something, I don't want to have to sign up. They were worried about being spammed, they were worried they might have signed up before. Those are the new customers. Even the repeat customers were getting pissed off. So 45% of all of the people who were coming through already had multiple registrations in the system, which were confusing themselves. And of the 160,000 plus forgotten password requests that happened per day, 75% of them didn't even come back. So it's not helping new users, it's not helping repeat users, it's causing a confusing mess. And the only way we learned about this was introducing some research to kind of pair the why to the what in the data. So they changed one thing, and this is why it's called the $300 million button. They changed a button, and they changed some language on the site. Same checkout flow, but rather than a form, you just get a continue button, and you get this sentence. You do not need to create an account to make purchases on our site. From a behavioural science point of view, that's called reactance, reactive devaluation. Basically, before Amazon was like an authority figure saying, you shall not pass until you give us data. Now we're emphasizing the opposite. We're saying you're totally free to do whatever you like. This single change resulted in a $300 million annual revenue increase attributed to the site that year, 15 million for extra purchases in the first month alone, and basically a ton more customers purchasing per month, and increased the number of people that were signing up. So it's basically just like a net gain all round from this tiny, tiny change, anchored in behavioural science. If we have time, I can talk about the exact principles that lay behind that button change, but for now, suffice it to say that tiny change, big impact. So the other story, which is 10 years later, is the study that I was talking about before, the messy middle. So Google kind of recognized that in amongst all these crazy touch points, we're kind of working in the dark. We don't know, we can't see what we're looking at, and therefore we don't know how to influence it. So they ran this experiment, a simulation experiment, that sought to influence the messy middle using a bunch of behavioral biases. These were the biases they used. I won't go through all of them, but some of them should be familiar. Social proof, we follow the wisdom of the crowd. People like us, we assume they do things that are in our interests. Authority bias, it's the dentist telling you your toothpaste is the best toothpaste. We believe them because they seem credible. Free seems to have a disproportionate, the word free seems to have a disproportionate effect on our brains, and we just kind of go mad when we see things are free. Things are running out, we get worried about that. You would have seen that on ticketing sites or Ryanair or something like that. These are all nice biases. They wanted to see, can we leverage these biases to cause a tangible change in people's purchase behaviors on websites? So what they did was really, really cool. They got a whole bunch of users in, and they created this kind of fake e-commerce platform. And they asked these users to name their favorite brand in a particular category. So I'm going to pretend it was the beauty category. Get a whole bunch of people in, and they say, what's your favorite brand? And they say, I don't know, Nivea, or something like that. So they create a platform, they put Nivea as brand A, They give it a few different criteria. They give it a star rating. This is 7-day delivery. Basically, the kind of proof points that you would design into an interface if you were doing an e-commerce platform. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Spotify. But so then they ask people, money aside, money's no object, would you buy this product? Obviously 100% of people said yes, I will buy this product because it's my self-stated favorite brand. Great, no surprise. So they run the experiment again, and they introduce another brand, random other brand, let's call it Dove. Exactly the same proof points, exact same star rating, everything's identical, nothing, no hierarchy built into the interface, and they now said to the group of people, which would you buy? Really, really weirdly, 30% of people said they'd buy the second brand. They said, brand A is my favorite, and yet I'm going to buy brand B. Which is bizarre, but is basically the case for all sort of generic marketing. Basically, you have to be there, it's the mere exposure effect. You have to be present to kind of sway opinion. So we can chalk up 30% to just random people, maybe they want a bit of novelty, maybe they're bored with their brand, we don't exactly know. Not that interesting yet, but now, what if we take brand B and we kind of charge it with some behavioural biases? So we say it's free shipping as opposed to free sample. We say natural ingredients instead of organic, so that's called a category heuristic. We change the language that best suits the mental model of the customer. When you buy a phone, you think of battery, screen size, and camera. You don't think of any of the other stuff. Those are category heuristics, the things we kind of gravitate towards. So they play with a few of those things, and they now run the experiment again, and they go, which would you buy? Self-stated brand A, that is your favorite, or brand B, now charged with a few biases? 57% of people switch their preference from brand A to brand B, with all these nudges applied, which is pretty wild, given that nothing really about the brand has changed. It's just how we framed it that's been changed. Now they run the experiment again, and they supercharge brand B with a whole bunch of behavioural biases. So it's free shipping, it's the winner of the beauty award, it's got 4 stars instead of 5 stars, it's next day delivery, it's only 2 left, those kind of things. Every single bias we can throw at it, we do. You might imagine what happened. 90% of people transfer their preference from the first choice to the second choice with all biases applied. This should be mind-blowing. This should make you think, like, what? I don't have control over the choices that I'm making. I don't even like brand B, and yet I'm being radically swayed just from a few kind of copy tweaks. They even did a kind of fun version of this where they thought maybe like brand equity would have a part in it. Does Dove have some sort of compelling proposition anyway? So they introduced a fake brand. They just made it up. No brand equity, no nothing. And we still find that when you supercharge it with behavioural biases, you get about 50% switching over to that brand. Maddeningly, this happens across every industry vertical you can imagine, from phones to car insurance to buying a holiday, like everything. There is not shampoo, there is literally not a category that this effect does not happen in, which is kind of wild, and I love it because it's basically validated everything I've said for the last 10 years. I'm like, here's a study that I can finally pull on and go, yeah, it actually works in context. Okay, cool. So that was really cool. I love what Google did there, and I really appreciate how much effort they put into it. But what about some of the bigger problems that we might be facing? So I'm going to start with a few objections to what I've just shown, because a bit like your kind of dialogue, like what are people going to say that's going to push back on this? How can we anticipate that? So the main objection, it's not really customer-centric. Well, I disagree. I think that this stuff has decades of empirical study behind it. It's scientifically rigorous in a way that usually we can't do in software companies. It's tested with real humans. It's under constant scrutiny. We talked earlier, there's a replication crisis going on in the soft sciences at the moment that means that these studies are being continually reviewed to check whether or not they are still valid. So they're just subject to a level of scrutiny that I don't personally have in my day-to-day job. That to me is customer-centric. What about, we can't just change what our product is? Well, yeah, okay, you can't change what your product is, but you've got a metric ton of behavioural biases to leverage, all of which have been documented really well. Most of the effects most of the things you're changing are small framing effects to design and copy. You don't need to fundamentally change the product. So they're mostly cosmetic. So yeah, it's kind of cheaper than fundamentally changing your product. And the last thing is that people say, especially the data scientists, go, it can't outperform our data modeling, which to some extent is true when you're talking about analyzing stuff in the past, but is not true when you're talking about predicting stuff in the future. And this is where I'm basically going to end it with one more case study that I think is particularly interesting. So what we find is that in the world of behavioral science, when predicting stuff about people's behavior in the future, less is more. Heuristics, rules of thumb, cognitive biases, whatever you want to call them, outperform the most complex and sophisticated data models that are out there. It is much better when dealing under conditions of uncertainty, like the messy middle of e-commerce, to use a single heuristic rather than loads of data points. This guy he's sort of the anti-behavioral scientist. He doesn't really like the kind of behavioral economics canon that exists, and I think he's fantastic. He basically says we have to get over this illusion that complex problems need complex solutions. Just because something is complicated doesn't mean we need to inject more and more variables to understand it. It's not strictly true. And my favorite case study for this, which, has anyone heard of Google Flu Trends? No, right, yeah, this is great. So this is, I mean, they've successfully binned it because no one's heard of it, but this is why it's a great case study. Pre-COVID, 2008, Google decides that they think they can use their keyword search term data to predict when flu outbreaks would happen. You know, what keywords are people typing into Google around when they're getting flu? Can we use that to predict the next wave of flu? So they looked at a bunch of keywords, they distilled them into this big sort of 45 variable algorithm. They claimed they could use it to predict the future. 2009 comes along, the next year, swine flu hits, Google totally misses it. So it fails. So they go, oh shit, what am I going to do? We're going to increase the number of variables that we're using from 45 to 160. They start calibrating their model over the next 4 years. 2013, Google fails to predict the peak flu season by an error margin of 140%, much, much worse than just if any of you in this room gave it a guess. And so they quietly retired it later on that year, understandably. The cool thing about this, or like what we can learn from the kind of death of Google Flu Trends, is that from a predictive standpoint, heuristics, rules of thumb, perform better. This guy, the guy who I quoted talking about we need to get over this illusion, he ran this study again, and he said, okay, let's just use a single heuristic, a recency heuristic, which is a single rule. The rule is, have the number of flu-related GP visits in the last 2 weeks, are they greater than the previous 2 weeks? One variable. That one variable was tested on 4 years of historical data, and it outperformed Google tenfold, basically. So it's kind of a classic case of over-engineering, and it makes sense. We think that we want to sort of apply complexity to solve complexity, but it's just not true. In some instances, less is more. But, and it's a big but, I was told to put some GIFs in, so this was a last-minute addition. Which is quite a good one. But it's not the whole puzzle, right? It's not the whole pie. Behavioral science will never be a substitute for kind of holistic research. I'm a researcher by trade. I would never say that you can sub in behavioral science for everything. It represents a small part of a much wider, extensive primary research pool. Yes, it's cheaper. Yes, it saves on post-its, but it's only a small part of what we're doing. You want to pair it with qualitative discovery, with co-creation sessions to like spring creativity out of what you find. You want to do stakeholder interviews to understand things that you didn't normally you didn't understand before from the people that are closest to it. Surveys, digital ethnography, all the stuff that we're sort of super familiar with in the research and product world. This is what you want to do, and you want to balance it. You want to balance it in relative sizes. Focus on the primary qualitative research. Focus on customer pain points. Pair it with creativity. Get the humans or the AI to then turn it into something that's kind of miraculous, because that. Science is not the best. Go to an academic conference. They cannot present for shit. They're so boring. Like, you need someone else to come in and turn it into something amazing and creative, and then just use behavioral nudges to kind of eke people through the little bits that you're kind of struggling with. So that stuff in the big circle is kind of what we do. But my background is in science, so I would say, come to us, give us a nudge, and we can help you out with all of this. I wasn't allowed to plug our school, so it's very, very light.
Thanks, Alec. That was a great talk. Has anyone got any questions? Alec? Anyone? Yeah.
Fantastic talk. Love those case studies. I was wondering, as researchers, we are actually really dependent in certain ways on research that's happening in universities, and I'm just really aware that universities are having kind of a hard time right now. in Britain and elsewhere, and I just wondered, you know, is there anything we can do? Like, how can we benefit from this research but not like do anything about that?
Do you want me to solve world peace as well?
I know.
That is really tricky. I mean, like, obviously funding is going to be part of it. There's an interesting website at the moment that is, I can't remember what it is, but basically it's keeping track of all the studies, like the ones featured in this, that have been kind of retested and found to be not completely invalidated, but maybe not as effective as we thought before. So we used to think that if you could prime people to kind of underperform their intellectual ability by reminding them of certain characteristics that are sort of baked into, negative characteristics that are baked into society. So there's a website that kind of keeps track of these things that is largely coming out from the world of university research. What else can we do?
Can you share?
Yes, I'll definitely share that. Yeah, it's really, it's on my phone right now. It's really good because I was like, I got to check that all my case studies haven't been rapidly invalidated in the last day before I start presenting to you. Luckily, they all still stand. So yes, I can share that. What else? I think maybe like university students perhaps don't get the platform that like we in the working world do. I think it'd be really cool to get university students to come here and they can learn from how we take their information and practically apply it to something, and they can learn about how the world of real work doesn't have budgets or timelines that they're used to, and that's going to be a challenge. So yeah, 2 potential ways.
Okay. Anyone else? Bueller? So I've got one. So obviously I started with weird science, which seemed pretty off topic / on topic. Again, obviously you mentioned English students. How can we ensure that the research we do is diverse to begin with, and also representative of the general population, and avoid any of the whole kind of weird sort of thing that's going on at the moment?
Yeah, so you're completely right that weird acronym means that there's basically bias built into the research process, which is difficult to control for because a lot of research is done by like hand raising. People volunteer to participate in research. So if a particular demographic skew volunteers to participate in research and that's your only option, then like you end up doing that. So there's an unavoidable bias that I'm not saying we should just tolerate, but the fact is that we now have an acronym for it that means, and we can kind of create sort of segments of those people to go, okay, yes, we have an understanding of X, Y, and Z behavioural pattern, but our knowledge, we only know it in the context of these white Anglo-Saxon males, or whatever the acronym is that we can pin them to. The other way is to anonymize stuff better. So the case study that I always think of is when Amazon, pre-AI, they tried to expedite their hiring process by feeding in a bunch of the CVs of the best Amazon employees that they'd ever have into a machine learning algorithm, and basically get that algorithm to vet future CVs against the ones that they put into it. So they say, we're only going to hire the best of the best because the machine learning model is going to go, I know what the best is, and I'll screen out people that don't match that. That model screened out 90% of women. It's terrible, right? So like we know that basically bias in, bias out. And I think you can, if we were to maybe anonymize some stuff about the participants that we get through, or educate researchers to include the diversity in their screeners, maybe, would be another way, then you can kind of solve the problem by better randomization and anonymization and better education of the researchers. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Great, thanks very much. Great answer. Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh, here we go.
There's always one. Thanks, Alec. That was really, really awesome. And thanks for putting that GIF in as well. I just wanted to ask if you mentioned at the end, obviously, it's not the answer to everything, and you need to do it alongside stuff that we're familiar with, like qual research and all that other good stuff. Is there a particular resource or tool or book or something that people interested in behavioural science and kind of putting that alongside that other stuff can dig into as a kind of 101 starting place.
101 on behavioural science.
Outside of basketball.
Yeah, outside of basketball. Yeah, cool. Yeah, actually, so over the years I've compiled a reading list. The problem is my reading list, like, it started really accessible, and then I was like, oh, people should read about like Jungian psychology as well, and like maybe you should do some anthropology, and it basically went like way west of what it should be. The most accessible behavioural science stuff are the science popularizers. So Malcolm Gladwell, Dan Ariely, Daniel Kahneman, these are like the gospels of popularized science. They're also the ones to watch out for, because what they have sort of illuminated is now under scrutiny, so not everything that they talk about is strictly true. From an interface point of view, there's people who distilled all of these things down. So like UXers will know about sort of Gestalt theory and things like that. There are websites, Cogload is one of them, UX Patterns I think is another one, and they've basically taken a lot of these things and said, this not only this is what it is, but this is what it could look like. So, you know, social proof. Everyone talks about social proof. You know, we follow the wisdom of the crowd, but there's actually 5 types of social proof. You know, do you follow the wisdom of people who are older than you? Do you follow the wisdom of your peers? Do you follow the wisdom of numbers of people? Do you follow? Is it about the quality of the person or the volume of the people? So there's all sorts of complexity, and you can represent that in an interface in tons of ways. Reviews, testimonials, cards, and stuff like that. So Cogload is quite good for showing you the scientific literature, but then pinning it to something kind of practical that you can use. But I can share resources after this, for sure.
Cool. Brilliant. Okay, finishing up now. Any last takers on the questions? You thought you were done.
Yeah.
And he brings you back.
I had a question around how your education has changed the way that you like your consumer habits, and how you protect yourself online and not just get hijacked by all these really clever algorithms.
Yeah. So I love this question, because basically the answer is it doesn't work. You can't insulate yourself from this, no matter how educated you become. And I tried to prove this out about 6 years ago. I took a study from a behavioural science paper, and I ran it in my office on about 500 people, with the consent of the CEO, but not the consent of the people. I got the consent afterwards, just to be clear. But I ran the study to see whether or not, because basically it was in a marketing agency, and we had like 10 behavioural biases up on the wall, and we were more or less sort of instructed, pick a bias and like put it into your brief. You know, you're building a website, you want to use loss aversion. You want to do something with news, use the availability heuristic. It was literally like pick and choose, like a menu. And my sort of thesis was that just because it's all up on the wall and we're all using it every day does not mean we're immune from its effects. So I ran a study testing to what extent you could manipulate people's honesty with a set of cartoon eyes looking at them. I won't go into the details, I can chat afterwards, but basically it failed. Like everyone, despite knowing about the bias, despite being told about it, fell victim to its effects. So you can't insulate yourself against it, but knowing about them will make you a better designer, because it will give you a language to describe the things that you're seeing. I still buy shit from Instagram that I don't need once I've been retargeted 3 times. That's all it takes, and I know that that's ridiculous. But now at least I have a sort of mental model for why it's having the effect on me it does, and then I can go, well, maybe that's unethical. Maybe I don't want to do that, so I can sort of counter it with something, with the inverse of that. So yeah, I would say seek the education for your own enlightenment, not to protect yourself online, because it won't work.
Great, thanks very much. I think we should give another warm welcome